Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit, and welcome to another weekend book review. I'm Pavlov.
And I'm Nikita.
We've noticed a lot of you are tuning in, which is amazing, but I haven't quite hit that subscribe button yet.
Yeah, and that little button, honestly, it's so small, but it makes such a huge difference in helping us reach more people with these important discussions.
Right. It's true. Like the algorithms, those mysterious forces that decide what we all see and hear, they pay a lot of attention to subscriber numbers.
Yeah, think of it like the subscribing. It's like casting a vote for quality content, So these insightful research discussions don't just get lost in the sea of all the information out there.
More subscribers equals more visibility. Right. And that means more resources for us to make even deeper dives for you.
Yeah.
Maybe bring in experts for interviews, even do some live Q&A sessions where you can jump in.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about building a community around research,
Yeah.
where curiosity thrives and knowledge is like shared and debated. We're going to be exploring bilingualism.
Fascinating topic.
It is. And I'm really excited about the source material you sent over.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Some excerpts from a recent book on the science of bilingualism.
Okay.
And then a collection of personal stories from bilinguals.
Cool.
It's a really interesting mix.
Yeah.
So we're going to be kind of looking at like what bilingualism really means, how it happens, and then how it impacts people's lives.
Even their brains.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really interesting.
Thousands.
When you think about it, we often think of bilingualism as this simple concept. But it's so much more than just speaking two languages.
Absolutely. The book we're looking at, it actually starts by debunking this common myth.
Okay.
That, being bilingual means you speak two languages perfectly.
Right.
Or equally well.
And that's not the case at all.
Not at all.
Even highly proficient bilinguals might favor one language over another,
right,
depending on the topic they're talking about.
Yeah, like what they're talking about or who they're talking to.
Exactly. The author gives this example of a linguist who preferred speaking Italian when discussing home renovations.
Really?
Because of a personal experience they had in Italy.
Huh.
So it really highlights how our language is intertwined with our experience.
Totally. It makes you wonder if our brains create these little pockets of language preference based on our memories and emotions.
Yeah, fascinating stuff.
So what else does the book have to say about these bilingual myths?
Well, one of the things that I found really surprising is just how common bilingualism actually is.
Really?
It's the global norm, not the exception.
Wow. I did not realize that.
Yeah, more than half the world's population uses multiple languages.
That's amazing. It really challenges the perception, at least in the US, that monolingualism is the standard.
Exactly. And for most of human history,
right,
being able to communicate in more than one language was probably essential for survival and cultural exchange.
That's a great point.
So it puts things into perspective.
Totally. So why do we have this misconception that bilingualism is unusual?
Well, the book traces this back to a historical misconception.
Okay.
That speaking multiple languages could actually hinder a child's development.
Really? Where did that idea even come from?
It seems to stem from this idea of pure languages.
Okay.
And a fear of mixing them.
Like it corrupts them or something.
Yeah, like this notion that mixing languages somehow corrupts or contaminates them.
That's so strange. I mean, language is constantly evolving.
It is.
So why would mixing be a bad thing?
And this misconception unfortunately led to some misguided policies.
Oh, no.
Especially in education.
Like what?
Well, for example, in the U.S., there were these movements advocating for English-only education.
Wow.
Particularly for immigrant children.
But wouldn't that make it harder for those children to learn?
That's the irony, right?
Yeah.
A lot of these policies weren't based on actual evidence. They were rooted more in social and political agendas.
Ugh, so frustrating.
Yeah, and unfortunately, these debates about bilingualism are still politically charged.
I bet.
In many societies. The book uses the example of Northern Ireland.
Okay.
Where the role of the Irish language is a major point of contention.
It's a reminder that language is often tied to identity.
Absolutely.
And can be a really powerful tool for both unity and division.
Right. Speaking of identity.
Yes.
The personal stories you sent in really bring this to life.
Oh, good.
There's one from a construction worker in London who grew up speaking Sotho, Zulu, Xhosa, and Ndebele.
Wow, and then learned English and Afrikaans at school?
Exactly. So we're talking at least 5 languages.
It's amazing. It makes you realize that for so many people around the world, switching between languages is just part of daily life.
It challenges our assumptions about what's normal
Yeah, for sure.
when it comes to language.
And speaking of switching between languages, the book mentions that there are different types of bilingualism. I did not know that.
So you have coordinate bilingualism
Okay.
and then compound bilingualism.
What's the difference?
So coordinate bilingualism is when you learn languages in separate contexts.
Gotcha.
So they're kind of stored separately in your brain.
Okay.
And compound bilingualism is when you learn two languages simultaneously, often in the same environment.
So like growing up in a household
Exactly.
where two languages are spoken.
Yeah, or maybe like an immersive language program
Interesting.
where you're constantly exposed to both languages.
Makes sense.
It seems like there are a lot of individual differences
Yeah?
in how people experience bilingualism.
Well, if bilingualism is so natural for so many people around the world,
Yeah.
why does it feel so difficult to learn a second language as an adult?
Well, there's definitely a difference in how children and adults learn languages.
Okay.
Children's brains are incredibly adept at absorbing new information,
Right.
and they can pick up multiple languages
Uh-huh.
effortlessly from a very young age.
Yeah, they're like little sponges.
Exactly. They can even distinguish different languages before they can speak.
Wow. That's amazing.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean adults can't become fluent.
Right.
It just takes a different approach.
And probably a lot more effort.
You could say
A
that.
little more intentional effort.
And motivation, of course.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of motivation,
Yes.
the book talks about instrumental and integrative motivation.
Right.
What's that all about?
So instrumental motivation is like learning a language for a specific purpose,
Okay.
like getting a job or traveling.
Makes sense.
Integrative motivation is more about connecting with a culture or community.
Right. So it's more like, I want to learn this language because I love the culture.
Exactly. It's about a deeper connection.
So do you think people who have both types of motivation are more successful?
Well, research suggests that they might be.
Interesting.
Having a personal connection to the language beyond just a practical need can make a big difference.
Right, right.
It's a journey, not a destination.
That's a great way to put it.
It's a process.
Yeah. And what I found really interesting in these personal stories
Yeah.
is how languages are intertwined with people's identities.
Right.
Like it's not just about the words, it's about their sense of self, their
Absolutely.
cultural heritage.
Their connection to family and community.
Yeah. There's this one story that really stuck with me.
Okay.
It's about this woman named Sophia,
Okay.
and she describes how she became more aware of her Greek heritage as a teenager. And she talks about how her father was involved in the resistance against the Greek military junta in the late 60s.
Wow.
And she'd go to these meetings with him and listen to Greek music.
That's amazing.
And it really ignited this passion for the language
Yeah.
and her cultural identity.
That's a beautiful example of how language can connect us to something much larger than ourselves.
It's power.
A source of pride, resistance.
Even healing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of powerful impacts, I want to move on to the bilingual brain.
Yes. Fascinating stuff.
It's so cool. So the book dives into how bilingualism can physically change the structure and function of our brains.
It's quite remarkable.
Okay, let's get into the science. Studies have shown that bilingualism can increase the density of gray matter in certain areas of the brain.
Okay.
What's going on there?
Well, it has to do with neuroplasticity.
Okay.
So our brains are constantly changing and adapting
Right.
based on our experiences.
So the more you use your brain in a certain way, the
Yeah.
more those connections are reinforced.
Exactly. And with bilingualism, it's not just about learning new vocabulary.
Okay.
It's about constantly juggling two linguistic systems.
Right.
And that has a profound impact on brain structure and function.
And the book specifically mentions the prefrontal cortex.
Yes.
What's so special about that?
Well, the prefrontal cortex is involved in all sorts of higher level cognitive functions.
Okay.
Planning, decision making, attention control.
So are bilingual people basically supercharged multitaskers?
Well, some studies suggest that bilinguals might outperform monolinguals
Okay.
in tasks that require cognitive flexibility
Gotcha.
and the ability to switch between different sets of rules.
Wow, so there really is a bilingual advantage.
It's definitely more than just a myth.
I thought it was just a myth.
Researchers have linked bilingualism to all sorts of cognitive benefits.
Like what?
Improved attention span, better problem-solving skills, and even a delayed onset of dementia.
Wait, a delayed onset of dementia?
That's a big one.
How does that work?
Well, it seems that constantly challenging your brain with multiple languages creates this cognitive reserve.
Okay.
It's like building a buffer against age-related decline.
That's incredible. You know, after learning all this, I'm starting to feel a little envious.
Well, there are definitely some fascinating cognitive benefits, but it's not always a walk in the park.
Oh, right. Of course.
The book also points out that bilinguals sometimes experience a slight delay in word retrieval.
So they might have trouble finding the right words sometime.
Yeah, we're talking milliseconds here.
Okay.
It's usually not noticeable in conversation.
Gotcha.
It's just something researchers have observed in lab settings.
Interesting. So it's like their brains are searching through 2 dictionaries at once.
That's a great analogy.
But even with that slight delay, the bilingual brain seems to have this remarkable ability to manage and control 2 languages.
It's incredibly precise.
The book uses the term control system to describe how the brain prevents one language from intruding on the other.
Right?
It's fascinating to think about.
It really is. And this leads us to another fascinating aspect of bilingualism. Code switching.
Ah, yes. The personal stories are full of examples of this.
Exactly. For a long time, this was seen as a sign of poor language skills.
Really?
Like people weren't truly fluent.
Like they're messing up.
Yeah, like they were mixing things up because they didn't know any better.
But we know that's not the case now.
No, not at all.
Code switching is actually a very sophisticated skill. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's strategic, it's intentional,
Okay.
and it carries a lot of cultural and social meaning.
The book gives this example of an Indian TV show that uses both Hindi and English to appeal to a wider audience.
Exactly. And it also talks about this Punjabi woman living in London who uses English words to express the erosion of her native culture.
Oh, wow.
Like the English language is literally taking over her Punjabi.
Both of those examples are so powerful.
They are.
Like it shows how code switching can be used to express complex ideas and emotions and even make these subtle commentaries on cultural dynamics.
Exactly. It adds a whole other layer of meaning to communication.
Okay, but how does it work? How do people decide when to switch?
Well, it seems like a lot of factors are at play. Who they're talking to, the topic of conversation, the social context, even their emotional state.
So it's not random at all?
Not at all. It's like a whole other layer of communication.
The book talks about this idea of translanguaging.
Yeah, interesting concept.
It acknowledges that bilinguals don't use their languages in isolation.
Right.
They draw on their entire linguistic repertoire.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if the lines between languages are actually much blurrier than we think.
What do you think about that?
That's a great question. It's something linguists are still grappling with.
Yeah.
It's not a simple answer.
There's this example in the book about a Cypriot woman.
Oh, yeah.
Who mimics her husband's authoritative tone by switching to Greek.
Yes. She even deepens her voice to emphasize the power dynamic.
That's amazing.
It's brilliant.
I never thought about language this way before.
It's really fascinating, isn't it?
And we've only just scratched the surface. Bilingualism isn't just about spoken language.
Right.
It affects how we read and write, too.
Absolutely.
So does code switching happen in writing?
It does.
Really?
Think about personal letters, social media posts, even literary works that incorporate multiple languages.
Like Shakespeare throwing in a bit of French.
Exactly. And more recently, there's this rise in translingual literature.
Okay.
Where writers intentionally blend languages.
Wow.
To create new forms of expression.
It's like bilingualism is breaking down barriers not just between people, but also between artistic mediums.
That's a great way to put it. And it makes you think about the future of bilingualism.
Right.
In a world that's becoming increasingly interconnected.
That's a great segue to the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll be right back to explore the future of bilingualism in a world shaped by migration, globalization, and technology. Welcome back. So we've been unpacking all these different facets of bilingualism.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
The myths, the science, the personal stories. It's really exciting. But what I'm curious about now is the bigger picture.
Okay.
Where is all of this headed?
Yeah, good question.
What does the future hold for bilingualism?
It's a question with no easy answers.
Right.
But it's a really important one to consider. The book points to several factors that are shaping the trajectory of bilingualism.
Right.
Things like migration, globalization, and technology.
Okay, let's start with migration.
Sure.
We know it's a major driver of multilingualism.
Absolutely.
The book actually cites some UN figures showing a significant increase in international migrants in recent years.
And many of those migrants come from diverse language backgrounds.
Right, so as they settle in new countries, they're adding to the linguistic tapestry of their new home.
It's really changing the linguistic landscape.
It makes me think of those incredibly diverse cities like London, New York, Toronto.
Yeah, all those languages coexisting.
It's pretty amazing.
It is.
But it also raises some questions.
Like what?
Do you think this kind of linguistic diversity leads to more integration and understanding?
Okay.
Or could it create divisions?
That's the challenge, isn't it? Yeah. The book even talks about this concept of super diversity.
Okay, what's that?
It's not just about having lots of different languages.
Right.
It's about the way young people, in particular, are navigating these multiple languages, both online and offline.
And creating new ways of communicating.
Exactly. It's really fascinating to see how they're blending languages and cultures.
It reminds me of that example in the book about the teenage girl.
Oh, yeah?
Who's constantly switching between French, English, Norwegian, and Wolof.
On her phone.
Yeah.
On her phone.
It's like a whole new world of language.
It gives us a glimpse into a future where multilingualism might be the norm.
Especially for younger generations.
But what about the role of technology in all of this?
Right.
I mean, we have things like machine translation getting better all the time.
Yeah.
Will we even need to learn other languages in the future?
It's a valid question.
What do you think?
The book actually mentions Facebook's new AI model, M2M100, which can translate directly between 200 languages. 200 languages? That's incredible.
That's pretty mind-blowing.
So does this mean language learning is becoming obsolete?
I don't think so.
Okay.
While machine translation is definitely a powerful tool,
right,
it still has its limitations.
Okay.
Especially when it comes to nuanced or creative communication.
I think there are definitely some things that get lost in translation.
You said it.
And, of course, there's the cultural aspect of language,
right,
which a machine can't replicate.
Exactly. You can't truly understand a culture without understanding its language.
It's more than just the words.
It's a window into a culture's values, beliefs, worldview.
You know, the book raises a really important concern.
Oh, yeah.
Will the dominance of English lead to the extinction of smaller languages?
It's a legitimate worry.
It's something I've thought about a lot.
Throughout history, we've seen languages disappear.
Yeah.
As a result of colonization, globalization, cultural assimilation.
And with English being so widespread,
it's easy to see how this could happen.
But the book also points out that other languages, like Mandarin and Hindi, are gaining influence
on the world stage.
So maybe it's not all doom and gloom.
Right. It's not a simple equation.
Yeah.
There are forces pushing toward homogenization, but there's also this growing awareness of the value of linguistic diversity.
That's good.
I think people are starting to understand that losing languages means losing unique ways of seeing and understanding the world.
So it's like a tug of war between these different forces shaping the future of language.
I like that analogy.
So with all these trends and possibilities swirling around, what does this all mean for us as individuals?
Well, I think for those of us who are already bilingual, it's an invitation to really embrace the richness of our linguistic heritage.
That's a great way to put it.
To see our bilingualism not as a burden or something unusual, but as a gift and a strength.
I like that.
And for those who aren't bilingual, maybe it's an invitation to explore new languages and cultures.
To step outside our comfort zones.
Yeah, to expand our perspectives on the world.
I love that idea.
Learning a new language is one of the most rewarding things you can do.
I agree.
It opens up your mind to new ways of thinking and being in the world.
And it all circles back to something we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
The power of language to connect us.
Right.
To enrich our lives, to make us more empathetic and understanding individuals.
Exactly. Language is a truly remarkable gift.
It is.
We should cherish it.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into bilingualism.
Time flies when you're having fun.
It really does.
We've covered so much ground.
We have.
And it's been an incredibly thought-provoking conversation.
It has. It really has.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
Likewise. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey.
My pleasure.
We hope it sparked your curiosity about the incredible diversity of human language and inspired you to continue exploring these fascinating topics. We've been on quite a journey with bilingualism.
It has been fascinating.
So many layers to it, you know?
Hey,
I'm still thinking about how it impacts our brains.
Yeah.
Our identities, even like the future of our world.
It really is mind-blowing when you think about it.
It is. And speaking of the future, I was thinking about something we touched on earlier.
Oh, yeah.
That Bilingualism can be a metaphor for navigating between any two systems.
Right, not just languages.
Exactly. Do you see examples of this in your own life?
Let me think.
Like, the book talks about bimusicality.
Oh, yeah. In Japanese musical culture.
Right. Where musicians are trained in both like traditional Japanese music and Western classical music.
So they have to switch between these different musical systems.
Scales, even instruments.
It's pretty amazing.
It highlights how the skills we develop in one area, like language, can be transferable to other areas.
It's like cross-training for your brain.
And it's not just music, either. The book also mentions visual artists who've absorbed new styles through cultural immersion.
Like who?
Like El Greco, Picasso.
Oh, interesting.
Anish Kapoor.
They've all been influenced by different cultures.
Yeah, and they incorporate those influences into their work.
Makes you wonder if being exposed to different ways of thinking makes us more innovative.
Right.
More adaptable.
I think there's definitely something to that.
It's like having a wider range of tools.
And perspectives to draw from.
And it brings us back to this idea of bilingualism as a metaphor.
Yeah.
For navigating a complex and interconnected world.
I like that.
As we wrap up, I have this sense of wonder.
Me too.
And a new appreciation for bilingualism.
It's more than just speaking two languages.
It's about embracing different ways of thinking.
Of being.
Of experiencing the world.
Absolutely.
Well, I think this deep dive has been incredibly enlightening.
I agree.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
My pleasure. It's been a great conversation. We hope this has inspired our listeners to continue exploring these ideas.
Maybe even embark on their own language learning journey.
Who knows? Maybe one day we'll be having this conversation in another language.
I'd love that. And don't forget to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for more captivating deep dives like this one. And if you're enjoying the show and want to support us in creating more insightful content, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Every contribution helps us continue this journey of exploration and discovery. Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep questioning, and keep revising and resubmitting.